Hello and welcome kids. Let's start with the chapter of rocks. Now, rocks can be defined as an aggregate of minerals. Rocks are aggregate of minerals which forms more or less definite unit of Earth's crust. Rocks are aggregate of minerals which forms more or less definite unit of Earth's crust. Rocks are aggregate of minerals which forms more or less definite unit of Earth's crust. Okay, now when we talk about rocks, we feel only the big boulders are rocks. No. Sand, silt, gravel, clay, these all particles are also called as rocks. Earth's crust is made up of many different types of rocks. All rocks vary from each other. Rocks differ, rocks vary from each other. Why do rocks vary from each other? Why do rocks differ from each other? Because first, the texture of the rock is different. They vary from each other with respect to texture, color, chemical composition, permeability, means some are more porous, some are less porous, some are smooth, some are rough. Mineral composition is different. The degree of resistance, means some rocks are hard, some rocks are soft. So that is how one rock will differ from each other with respect to color, texture, degree of resistance, permeability. Now, rocks are made up of minerals. So what are minerals? Minerals are naturally occurring substances. They are naturally occurring substances. Inorganic substances. Minerals are naturally occurring inorganic solid substances which have a definite physical and chemical properties. Under our earth, we have identified more than 2000 minerals. Minerals are naturally occurring solid inorganic substances which have a definite physical and chemical properties. We have identified almost 2000 minerals. Now, the most abundant mineral which is found in the entire earth as a whole are iron, silicon, magnesium, nickel, sulfur, calcium. But from these three, the most important which are found in earth as a whole are iron, silica, magnesium. So three minerals are found in abundance in earth as a whole: iron, silicon, magnesium. But when I talk only about Earth's crust contains mainly silicon and aluminium. So Earth as a whole contains iron, silicon, magnesium. But Earth's crust contains more of the iron and silicon and aluminium. Earth as a whole contains iron, silica, magnesium. Earth's crust contains silicon and aluminium. Now, we are going to talk about three different types of rocks. Before that, remember the difference between rocks and minerals. Rocks are aggregate of minerals. Minerals are naturally occurring inorganic substances which have a definite physical and chemical properties. rock will have no definite chemical composition. Minerals will always have a definite chemical composition. Minerals combine to form rocks. Elements combine to form compounds, and those compounds are called as minerals. So minerals form rocks and elements form compounds which form minerals. There are mainly three types of rocks: igneous, sedimentary, metamorphic. There are mainly four groups of minerals: silicate, carbonate, sulfide and metallic minerals. Now we are going to talk about the first rock, igneous rock. Igneous rock has been derived from the word igni. It's a Latin word ignis. Ignis means fire. Even in Sanskrit, there is a word called as Agni. Agni also means fire. Igneous rocks are the ones which are formed by cooling and solidification. Cooling and solidification of molten material. Igneous rocks are the ones which are formed by cooling and solidification of molten material. That molten material erupts out at the time of volcanic eruption. When there is cooling and solidification of molten material, the molten material, when it is under the surface of the earth, we call it as magma. When it comes out on the surface of the earth, we call it as lava. So that molten material, which is magma, when that molten material cools, when it solidifies, as it starts cooling, it starts solidifying. When it cools, when it solidifies, it leads to formation of the rock called as igneous rock. Called as igneous rock. How is igneous rock formed? By cooling and solidification of molten material. By cooling and solidification of molten material called as magma. So basically two processes leads to formation of igneous rock: cooling and solidification. Cooling and solidification of what? Molten material called as magma, which comes from great depth or interior of the earth. Now remember one thing, igneous rocks are the first rocks which are formed. So they are also called as primary rocks. They are also called as primary rocks because they are the first rocks which are formed. Igneous rocks are rich in alumina and silica. Igneous rocks are rich in alumina and silica. That is why they are also called as sialic rocks. That is why they are also called as sialic rocks, as they are rich in aluminum and silicate. Sialic, silica and alumina. I'll give you a few examples of igneous rock. Feldspar, quartz, granite, rhyolite. All these rocks are rich in silica and alumina. Igneous rocks are the rocks, I repeat again, which are formed by cooling and solidification of molten material called as magma. That magma comes from great depth or great interior of the earth. These rocks are the first rocks which are formed. That is why they are also called as primary rocks. They are rich in silica and alumina. So they are also called as sialic rocks. Igneous rocks are called as rocks of thermal origin, means they are formed by hot molten material cooling. Now when this molten material start cooling, as it starts solidifying, what will happen, do you know? The rocks will start forming crystals. So first it starts cooling and then it starts solidifying. As it starts solidifying, it starts forming crystals. So basically in igneous rock you will see three processes: cooling of magma, solidification of magma, crystallization of magma. So as it cools, the material starts solidifying, and as it solidifies and cools, simultaneously it starts forming crystals in it. So igneous rocks formed by cooling and solidification of molten magma, which comes from great depth of the earth. It is the first rock which is formed, so called as primary rock. They are rich in silica and alumina, so they are called as sialic rocks. Igneous rocks are formed by the process of cooling, solidification and crystallization, because igneous rocks will have crystals in them. Now, igneous rocks are very hard and compact. We use them mainly for construction purpose. They are hard and compact. Igneous rocks are formed by solidification of molten magma. Igneous rocks can be granular and crystalline. They will be hard and compact. They are formed by solidification of magma, molten magma. They are granular and crystallized and has crystal. But you know what? All igneous rocks will not have same size of crystal. The size of the crystal depend on the rate of cooling. If the rate of cooling is very fast, the size of the crystal will be small. If the rate of cooling is slow, so if the rate of cooling is slow, the size of the crystal will be large. If the rate of the cooling of the molten magma is fast, the size of the crystal will be small. Rate of cooling is slow, crystal will be large. Rate of cooling is fast, crystal will be small. So, the size of the crystal of igneous rock depend on rate of cooling of molten magma. If the magma cools fast, the size of the crystal will be, the size of the crystal will be small. Fast cooling, small crystal. Slow cooling, big crystal. Now, igneous rocks mainly contain silicate. Igneous rocks mainly contain silicate. Igneous rock doesn't get affected by chemical weathering because they don't allow water to percolate through them. They don't have so much of pores, so they don't allow water to percolate. Since water cannot percolate, it doesn't get affected by chemical weathering. It mainly gets affected by mechanical or physical weathering. It doesn't get affected by chemical weathering. Why it doesn't get affected by chemical weathering? It's a give reason which can come. Because they don't allow water to percolate through them. So which weathering they are more subjected to? Physical and or mechanical. Another name for physical weathering is mechanical weathering. Igneous rocks are associated with volcanic activities. Igneous rocks will not have layers. They don't have layers. So these are the characteristics of igneous rock. We can classify igneous rock in two types. First, we can classify igneous rock on the basis of their origin. And second, you can classify igneous rock on the basis of chemical composition. On the basis of chemical composition. On the basis of a origin, igneous rock can be intrusive igneous rock or it can be extrusive igneous rock. Chemical composition के basis पे it can be acidic igneous rock or it can be basic igneous rock. So what is the difference between intrusive and extrusive? Now many of the times the molten magma do not reach up to the surface of the earth, and the cooling of magma takes place below the surface of the earth. So when magma cools below the surface of the earth, we call it as intrusive igneous rock. We call it as intrusive igneous rock. When cooling of magma takes place under the surface of the earth, it is called as intrusive igneous rock. But when molten magma comes out on the surface of the earth and it cools on the surface of the earth, we call it as extrusive igneous rock. Intrusive cooling of magma takes place under the surface of the earth. Extrusive magma cools on the surface of the earth. Now, intrusive igneous rocks are also called as plutonic rocks. Extrusive igneous rocks are also called as volcanic rocks. Extrusive igneous rock is formed by cooling of magma on the surface of the earth. So let me tell you one thing. When magma cools on the surface of the earth, the cooling of magma takes place fast. So the size of the crystal in extrusive igneous rock will be small. But under intrusive igneous rock, the cooling of magma takes place slowly. So the size of the crystal will be large. The most common extrusive igneous rock is basalt. Very common is basalt. The most common intrusive igneous rock is granite. So granite is a very common intrusive igneous rock. Basalt is a very common extrusive igneous rock. But kids, don't be selective in learning the examples, because in exam they will give you any examples of the rock and they will ask you to classify which category of rock it will come into. So intrusive under the surface of the earth, extrusive on the surface of the earth. Intrusive size of the crystal will be large, extrusive size of the crystal will be small. Intrusive also called as plutonic rocks, extrusive also called as volcanic rock. The most common example of intrusive is basalt, and the most common example of extrusive is granite. You know what? Extrusive will be little smooth. Intrusive will be little coarse. Okay, extrusive will be little smooth and fine grained. Intrusive will be little coarse. Now, intrusive igneous rock, when it cools under the surface of the earth, it forms various landforms under the surface of the earth. Which are called as sill, dike, batholith, laccolith and neck. Now, under the surface of the earth, let's say this is under the surface of the earth. What happens is, many of the times, the magma get filled between the two layers of the rocks. And it's not solidifying over there. There are two layers of the rocks and magma gets filled between the two layers and it starts solidifying over there. That is called as sill. This is called as sill. Many of the times magma gets filled in the fissures. In the vertical fissures, the magma gets filled. Okay, magma gets filled in the vertical fissures or the cracks and it solidifies over there. That is called as dike. Sill and dike, both of them together are also called as hypobasal rock. They both together are also called as hypobasal rock because they are formed at the intermediate depth, not very deep not very high. They are formed under the surface of the earth at an intermediate depth. And they look like a very minor rocks. That is why we call them as hypobasal rock. We call them as hypobasal rock. We call them as hypobasal rock. Sorry. Okay, so sill is when horizontally between the two layers magma gets filled and cools and solidified. When in vertical cracks or fissures, magma fills and cools and solidify. Dike. Sill and dike both are formed at the intermediate depth. That is why they both are also called as hypobasal rock. They both are also called as hypobasal rock. They are minor rocks. But sometimes under the surface of the earth, huge dome-shaped structure can be formed. And this dome-shaped structure might not even have well-defined base. Sometimes when the earth's surface gets eroded, the top of these parts will come out. They are so huge. Huge dome-shaped structure who do not have well-defined base. We call them as batholith. They are called as batholith. That is also one of the intrusive landform which is formed by cooling and solidification of magma under the surface of the earth. But sometimes this dome-shaped structure are formed with a well-defined base. They are not as huge as batholith. Then we call them as laccolith. Batholith will be huge dome-shaped structure with no well-defined base. Laccolith are dome-shaped structure but not as huge as batholith, and they will have well-defined base. They are called as laccolith. They are called as laccolith. But this upper shape will be dome and the down will be flat. Batholith, laccolith, sill, dike, these all landforms are created under the surface of the earth. That is why they are called as intrusive landform. They are called as intrusive landform. Sill and dike together are called as hypobasal rock. They are formed at intermediate depth and they are minor rocks. Now, one more thing, neck. Sometimes a passage, there are some volcanoes which have become extinct. Sometimes the passage from where the molten material comes out, the passage of the extinct volcano, is filled with magma. Sometimes the passage of the extinct volcano gets filled with magma. Okay, it gets filled with magma and that magma solidifies in that only. It solidifies in that passage only. And that is called as neck. That is called as neck. So sometimes the magma gets filled in the passage of the extinct volcano. And in that passage only it solidifies. We call it as neck. We call it as neck. So these are all intrusive landforms. So that is igneous rock, origin, basis पे intrusive, extrusive. Now let's understand igneous rock on the basis of chemical composition. There are some igneous rock which contains 65 to 85% of silica. 65% to 85% of silica. And these are the rocks which contains very less iron and magnesium. They contain very less iron and magnesium. They are called as acidic igneous rock. Remember one thing, acidic igneous rocks will always have large crystals. They will always have large crystals. In fact, acidic igneous rocks are very commonly used for building material. They are very commonly used for building material. Usually acidic igneous rocks are lighter in color. And they are usually they are quite heavy, so they are quite light and basic will be heavy. Now basic is ulta. The one who has less of the silica and more of the iron and magnesium. More of the iron and magnesium are called as basic igneous rock. They usually will have small crystals. They will usually have small crystals. They usually will be darker in color. They usually will be darker in color. So, basalt again a very common example of basic igneous rock. A very common example, and granite is a very common example of acidic. So these are your igneous rocks. Remember one thing, you need to know all the examples of the rocks very well. So yes, this was the first type of rock, igneous rock. We saw how it is formed, we spoke about the characteristics, classification, again the type of intrusive landforms which are created because of igneous rock cooling under the surface of the earth. Okay, kids, we don't go in order. First we will do metamorphic rocks and then last we will do sedimentary rock. Okay. Now metamorphic rocks. Metamorphic rocks is what? So metamorphic rocks are the rocks which are formed by the process of metamorphism. What do you mean by metamorphism? So, okay, let me just... They are the rocks which are formed by metamorphism. Now, metamorphism means alteration. Alteration in the composition and structure of a rock. When an existing rock, which is maybe igneous or maybe it is sedimentary, when an existing rock undergoes changes, changes means metamorphism, that rock goes through physical process. The change in the rock is taking place because of physical process or because of chemical process. Means that rock is changing maybe because of temperature, because of pressure. The minerals in the rocks will change. So that changed rock, the changed rock is called as metamorphic rock. Let me tell you again, let us say there is a rock. Maybe that rock is igneous or sedimentary. Now that rock undergoes changes because of physical process, because of chemical process. In short, it can take place because of heat or pressure. The changes in the rock take place. And the changed rock is called as, metamorphic rocks. They are called as metamorphic rocks. Metamorphic rocks are composed of the minerals which are different from the rocks from which they are formed. Metamorphic rocks are harder. Okay, of course there will be secondary rocks because they are formed from the pre-existing rocks. They are formed from the pre-existing rocks. Metamorphic rocks are harder, compact than original rock. Harder and compact than original rock. For example, limestone is a sedimentary rock. When limestone goes through a lot of heat, it changes into marble. Marble is a metamorphic rock. So if you see marble is formed from limestone. Marble is harder as compared to limestone. Marble is harder as compared to limestone. Metamorphic rocks are impermeable. Means they do not allow water to percolate through them. They usually don't have fossil fuels. They don't have fossils. Maybe the original rock did have fossil, but metamorphic rock is formed because the original rock went through changes, and in that process of change, the fossil got destroyed. Metamorphic rocks, color, texture, chemical composition will be different from the pre-existing rock. New minerals are formed in the process of metamorphism. Now, metamorphic rock can be formed so it can be thermal metamorphism, dynamic metamorphism, regional metamorphism and local metamorphism. So metamorphic rocks sometimes are formed because the existing or the original rock goes through lot of, it comes under influence of high temperature. So when a rock changes due to high temperature, it is called as thermal metamorphism. For example, clay. If clay is heated a lot, it will lead to formation of slate. Okay, coal. If you heat coal a lot, it leads to formation of graphite. Second, dynamic metamorphism. Sometimes rock changes because they go through a lot of pressure. Because, see, you know very well, under the great depth, there is a lot of pressure. Why there is pressure? Because of the weight of the overlying rocks. Because of which the rock has lot of pressure. Because of the pressure, sometimes the chemical composition of the rock changes. When a rock changes because of pressure, we call it as dynamic metamorphism. We call it as dynamic metamorphism. So when rock changes because of temperature, we call it as thermal metamorphism. When rock changes because of pressure, we call it as dynamic metamorphism. When there is dynamic metamorphism, you know what happens is the minerals in the rock will arrange in a series of bands. The minerals in the rock will arrange in a series of bands, and that series of bands will be called as foliation. It will be called as foliation. So metamorphic rock experiences will go through foliation. Now third metamorphism is under the surface of the earth. There are large scale movement happening. Large scale movement is happening. Because of which there is weight, okay. Now, so let me tell you one thing. There is mountain building movement happening. Process. Igneous sedimentary rocks are buried deep inside the earth because of this mountain building movement. Now, when the rocks are buried deep inside the earth, they will go through, because of this large scale movement, rocks are buried deep inside the earth, they will go through heated pressure both, and rock will change. It is called as regional metamorphism. So now first, when rock changes only because of heat, we call it as thermal metamorphism. When rock changes because of pressure, we call it as dynamic metamorphism. When rock changes because of heat and pressure is caused due to large scale movement under the surface of the earth, we call it as regional metamorphism. When not entire rock changes, only a part of the rock changes, we call it as contact metamorphism. So these are the different types of metamorphic rock: marble, quartzite, slate, graphite, schist, gneiss, marble. These are all metamorphic rocks. So metamorphic rock can take place because of thermal, dynamic, regional and contact. So that was your metamorphic rocks. Now, next rock is sedimentary rocks. Sedimentary rocks are the rocks which are formed. How? So now suppose, let's say there is a rock which is exposed on the surface of the earth. Now this rock which is on the surface of the earth is exposed. Is on the surface of the earth. It is exposed to climatic condition, atmospheric condition, wind, water, everything. As a result, this rock will start breaking. It will break because of the process of weathering. And it will break into small pieces. There was a big rock which went through weathering and it broke into small pieces. Now these small pieces of the rocks will be carried away. Who is going to carry it away? The agents. The agents of gradation. Who are the agents of gradation? Wind, running water, ocean, glaciers. They all will carry it away. River, glacier, ocean waves, they will carry it away. Now this broken sediments which are carried away by agents of gradation, they will carry it and at one point they will deposit all of them. They will deposit all these sediments one upon another. So all these layers of sediment will be deposited. They will be deposited. Over a long period of time they will be deposited maybe in the river bed or in the ocean bed, in the lake bed. Every sediment layer which is getting deposited is going to add weight on the layer which is below. So the sediment will start getting deposited, So the weight of the overlying sediment will keep on adding the weight. And after many years, they will be cemented together to form a rock. This will be together forming a rock, and that is called a sedimentary rock. I'll repeat again. There is a rock which is exposed on the surface of the earth. This rock starts breaking because of the process of weathering. It breaks into small sediments. Those sediments are carried away by agents of gradation like wind, river, ocean, waves. They will carry it away. And this all sediment which are carried away by these agents are going to deposit the sediments in the river bed, ocean bed. The layer upon layer will keep on getting added, will keep on getting deposited. The layers which are below will start experiencing weight of the overlying sediment layer. Every new layer is going to add weight to the layer which is below. As a result, it will be compressed together into a rock, and that is called as sedimentary rock. Sedimentary rock is a secondary rock because it is not the first rock which is formed. There is already one rock which is breaking, and from the sediments of that rock, new rock is going to be formed. So it is a secondary rock. Sedimentary rocks might contain fossils because sometimes between this layer some animal body will get compressed, and after many years the body of the animal will decompose and the remains of the animals will be found, and those skeletal remains or what the remains of that animal will be called as fossil. Sedimentary rocks are stratified rocks because they occur in layers. So they are stratified rocks. 75% of our Earth's surface is composed of sedimentary rock. They usually make big landform. For example, fold mountains, they are formed by sedimentary rocks. Sedimentary rocks will make extensive landform. I give you example. Basically, sedimentary rocks are formed by the process of loose layers of sediment getting converted into rock. Kids, remember one thing. When this broken material were deposited, they were deposited as loose sediment. The layers of loose sediments were deposited one upon another. But after many years, this loose sediment got compressed into rock. So when the agents were depositing, they were depositing sediments. They were depositing loose sediments, and over the period of time, the loose sediment got converted into rock. This process is called as lithification. This process is called as lithification. The process by which the loose sediment get converted into hard rock is called as lithification. So sedimentary rock is formed by the process of lithification. Lithification can take place in three ways. Lithification can take place in three ways. The lithification process can take place by evaporation. They can take place by cementation, or they can take place by the process of compaction. Let's say there is a water here. Okay, you have seen salt pans. Okay, in salt pans, what we do is basically we put they are very shallow areas where we put seawater. Now, seawater is a mixture of seawater and salt. We put seawater in salt pans and we expose the seawater to sun. All the water will evaporate, and whatever are the loose salt pieces in that water will remain behind. As the water will evaporate, the salt will start forming small pieces. Correct? So, sometimes lithification can take place by evaporation. When water evaporates, whatever are the loose sediments in that water will be left behind and they will join and form a rock. So lithification can take place by evaporation. Lithification can also take place because of cementation. The sediments which are getting deposited, sometimes these sediments contain the sediments of this layers of sediment contain sediments of such material which are binding material. Those are the materials which have got quality of binding. For example, calcium compound, silica, iron. Naturally this naturally they have property of binding. ये लोग जोड़ने का काम करते हैं. तो if this layer जो deposit हुआ है उसमें calcium के sediments है, or if there are sediments containing iron, or if there are sediments containing silica, naturally ये सारे sediment को वो लोग जोड़ने का काम करेंगे and they will convert them into rock, because calcium, iron, silica, they naturally have the property of binding. So in this layer of sediment, if any sediments are of binding material, your rock will be cemented together and it is called as cementation. So automatically loose sediment rock में convert हो जाएगा. Who is going to do that job? The binding material, and that is called as cementation. Then we have compaction. Every layer of sediment is experiencing lot of weight. Who is adding the weight? The overlying sediment. Because of the weight, the sediments start getting compressed and form into rock. That is called as compaction. So, lithification is what? Loose sediment getting converted into rock. How can loose sediment convert into rock? Either by the process of evaporation, or by the process of cementation, or by the process of compaction. These are the three ways by which lithification can take place. Now, sedimentary rocks can be classified into different categories. Let us classify sedimentary rock on the basis of formation. On the basis of formation, there can be mechanically formed sedimentary rock, there can be chemically formed sedimentary rock, and there can be organically formed sedimentary rock. Now, mechanically formed sedimentary rocks. Sedimentary rocks, when they break, any rock when it breaks, they get converted into small pieces. What do we call those pieces? As sediment. Actually, the correct word for them is clastic sediment. So there is a rock. That rock breaks into small pieces because it is exposed. The small pieces are called as clastic sediment. They are called as clastic sediment. Now, this clastic sediment are carried away by agents of gradation. By agents of gradation like river, ocean, they are carried away. Now, When they are carried away, they are, let's say river carried it away and river started depositing it. River started depositing it. When these layers are getting deposited, the weight of every new layer is going to add more weight to the layer below, because of which the rock will squeeze and get converted into rock. The sediments will squeeze and get converted into rock. It will convert into rock, and we call that as mechanically formed sedimentary rock. Then we have chemically formed sedimentary rocks. These are the rocks which are formed when the water evaporates from the solution. There is a solution. Solution contains water and some sediments. Now when you expose that solution to sun, water will evaporate. Water will evaporate. And the loose sediments will be left behind. That is called as chemically formed sedimentary rock. For example, rock salt. Same process what I told you in that salt pan. If you put a solution of seawater, all the water will evaporate and the leftover rock will form rock salt. So that is called as chemically formed sedimentary rock. Then we have organically formed sedimentary rocks. They are the rocks which are formed from dead remains of plants and animals. There are dead remains of plants and animals. For example, limestone. Limestone is formed from the skeletons of animal. Okay, limestone will contain large quantity of lime because it is formed from the skeleton of animals. So even rock like coal is formed from the dead plants. When the plants die, get buried in swampy area, when that vegetation start getting buried in swampy area, that vegetation start going through that vegetation will experience lot of heat. It will start going deep under the ground. It will go through lot of heat, lot of pressure, and that vegetative matter which is getting buried after many years, millions of years के बाद will get converted into coal. So coal is also formed from dead plants. Limestone is formed from the skeletons of dead animals. In fact, in the ancient period, there was swampy area in the forest region which got buried, and that swampy area got buried, went through changes because of heat and pressure under the surface of the earth, and this got converted into fossil fuel. Today we call that fossil fuel as coal. Coal are of different category. The best coal, it is many millions of years old, it is called as anthracite. Then second best coal after anthracite, second best is bituminous. Then there is lignite, there is peat. All the coals are rich in carbon, so they can also be called as carbonaceous rock. They can also be called as carbonaceous rock. Then we have chalk. Chalk is also a form of carbonate rock. Also, so this is how, in fact, when the remains of plants and animals get buried, they get converted into petroleum. Petroleum is a type of, so when there is animal remains or plant remains, they can get converted into petroleum. Plant getting buried, get converted into coal. Coal is carbonaceous rock because it is rich in carbon. Limestone is formed from the skeletons of the animal. It is rich in calcium. It is also called as calcareous rock. Now, so these are the different types of sedimentary rocks on the way, which are called as organically formed. Now, the sediments which are getting deposited, who is bringing those sediments? Who are the agents bringing those sediments? According to that also we can classify sedimentary rock. For example, if the sediments are brought by river, we call it as riverine rocks. We call it as riverine rocks. If the sediments are deposited in the bed of a lake, we call it as lacustrine rock. If it is formed by deposition of the glaciers, we call it as moraine. We call it as moraine. We can also call it as glacial rocks. Now, if it is deposited by sand particles deposited by wind, okay, sand particles deposited by wind, we can call it as aeolian rocks. We call it as aeolian rocks. They are called as aeolian rocks. In fact, Loess is an example of aeolian deposit. And now last we have marine sedimentary rocks. Marine sedimentary rocks can be of two types. They can be, marine sedimentary rock can be carbonaceous. They can be carbonaceous or they can be calcareous. Carbonaceous sedimentary rocks are the ones which are formed from the sea plants, which have been buried for a long period of time. We call them as fossil. Calcareous sedimentary rocks are the ones which are formed from the shells and skeletons of the animals. Corals, for example, oysters, corals, okay. These are the people who live on the floor of the oceans. We extract calcium carbonate. They extract calcium carbonate. They live in the ocean and extract calcium carbonate from ocean. So the one which are formed from the sea plants and animals is carbonaceous, and the one which is formed from the skeletons and shell is called as calcareous. So these are the different type of marine sedimentary rocks. So we have sedimentary rocks mechanically formed, chemically formed, or organically formed. The most common organically formed sedimentary rock is limestone, which is formed from the shells and the skeletons of the animal. Coal, which is formed from the dead plants, dead vegetation, and petroleum, which is formed from the remains of the dead plants and animals. According to the deposition done by which agents, if that agent is riverine rocks, lake, lacustrine rock, glaciers, moraine, wind, aeolian. Okay, marine sedimentary rocks can be of two types, calcareous or carbonaceous. Carbonaceous, coal and petroleum. Calcareous, limestone. Calcareous will be formed from shells and skeletons. Carbonaceous will be formed from dead remains of plants and animals. So these are your sedimentary rocks. Kids, remember one thing, rock are very important because they are source of minerals. Rocks also provide us with semi-precious stones. Rocks weathering leads to formation of soil. Rocks are useful for construction of buildings. Rocks are also important source of fossil fuel. Remember one thing, one rock continuously gets converted into another rock, into new rock, and that process is called as rock cycle. For example, there is an igneous rock, which is a primary rock. Now, igneous rock is formed on the surface of the earth when cooling of molten magma takes place. Now, when that rock which is formed on the surface of the earth is exposed, so the rock will start breaking. It will break into small sediments, and they will be transported by agents of gradation. These agents of gradation will transport the sediment in river basin, lake basin, or ocean basin, and they will get converted into sedimentary rocks because they will go through the process of lithification. Now these sedimentary rocks then will be carried in depression or in the sea floor further down, and they will go through changes. They will change and convert into metamorphic rocks. Now metamorphic rocks are taking place forming because of heat and pressure. In case that rock will melt, that molten magma when again will come out and will cool, it will form igneous rock. So this is how the rock cycle takes place. Rock gets transformed from one to another. So that is your rock cycle. So kids, we are done with rocks chapter. Thank you so much.